Hi, today I thought I would make a little video talking about an author that I really like named John Steinbeck. So in this video, I'm going to introduce to you 5 different works by John Steinbeck, and I hope to, in the future, release another video that's a sequel to this where I'll introduce to you 5 more books by him. But for this video, we're just doing 5, and before I tell you the 5 books though, I wanted to help you to get to know John Steinbeck a little bit better, because I think through knowing the author a bit more, you can fully better appreciate their works and have a better understanding of their works. So I'm going to start the video by giving you a little introduction into John Steinbeck's life. So John Steinbeck was born in Salinas, California in 1902, and he later cited that his first fascination with literature came when he was 9 years old, and his aunt gifted him Sir Thomas Malory's accounts of the legends of King Arthur. And you can see throughout his life and in his literature the effect that King Arthur legends had on his writing. And he said that by the time he was a teenager, he already knew that he wanted to be a writer. So in 1919, he enrolled in Stanford University. Now, it seems that he more so enrolled due to parental pressure, more to satisfy his parents' desire for him to go to Stanford. And he was there until 1925. So he was there for like 6 years, but he didn't actually finish his degree. When he was there, he really just took classes that he wanted to take, so classes that he thought would aid him in becoming a better writer. And a lot of times he would also do a lot of manual labor jobs while he was doing classes and things. So he didn't complete his degree, but I don't think he wanted to. I think he didn't really want to go there in the first place. But he left in 1925 and he went to New York to try to become a writer, try to establish himself as a writer in New York. And he took some jobs as a reporter and as a manual laborer, but didn't really have any success there living in New York. And so in 1926, just a year later, he moved back to California and he became a caretaker for Lake Tahoe. And he really liked this because it allowed him to have long periods of time in seclusion. And so it helped him be able to spend a lot of time writing. And so he would end up being able to publish his first book in 1929 called A Cup of Gold. Now, this book had no literary success, and he would go on to write 2 more books called Pasture of Heaven and To a God Unknown, 1932 and 1933, respectively. And neither of these initial 3 books that he wrote had any success, but his first literary success came in 1935 with the publication of Tortilla Flat. Tortilla Flat was a very light, fun-hearted novel, and he followed this success up with In Dubious Battle in 1936, which was a very different book than Tortilla Flat. In Dubious Battle was about a man who was trying to organize a labor strike due to the poor working conditions that these fruit pickers were having. So it definitely had a much darker tone than Tortilla Flat did. And then following In Dubious Battle, he would go on to write 2 of his most successful novels, which were Of Mice of Men, which he published in 1937, and then The Grapes of Wrath, which he published in 1939. And when Grapes of Wrath was published, it was the best-selling book of 1939 and won him a Pulitzer Prize. Now, following the success of The Grapes of Wrath, he went on a 6-week journey throughout the Gulf of California with his best friend, Ed Ricketts. And Ed Ricketts had a very impactful influence on John Steinbeck's writing and his life in general. He really became John Steinbeck's absolute best friend. They went to the Gulf of California on this voyage to collect marine life, and they would end up writing a detailed 6-week account of this voyage in The Log from the Sea of Cortez, which John Steinbeck later republished as The Sea of Cortez. But it was also during this journey that he met the kinds of people and spent time with the kinds of people that would inspire him to later write The Pearl in 1947, I think. Now, after this, obviously, World War II is happening. And during World War II, he worked as a war correspondent for the New York Herald's Tribune, which basically meant that he just went around to war sites and he would publish what he would see, and it would be published in the New York Herald Tribune. And you can read a lot of the columns that he published during this time because they were later collected in a book that's called Once There Was a War. And so if you want to read those, you can. But he also published The Moon is Down during this time, which was about a Northern European town that's invaded by a foreign army. And it's about the citizens of that town and their initial reaction to being invaded, but then also their resistance to the invasion. And during World War II, he did get injured towards the end. I think that he blasted both of his eardrums and he did receive a concussion. And I've heard that there's a lot of speculation that this concussion, this brain injury, might have had lifelong negative effects for him. I don't know, but I've heard people say that just because it seems that he had more issues with emotional regulation following the end of World War II. And so some people claim that that could come from the brain injury that he received during that time. I don't know, it could also just come from PTSD from everything he experienced during the war. I'm not sure, but at the end of World War II, obviously he didn't want to think about World War II. He wanted to write a novel that was fun and uplifting and not focusing on how horrible the world can be at times. And so in 1945, he released Cannery Row, which was a more fun novel, and it is one of the books that I will be introducing later as well. But he also released The Pearl, which I said he got his influence earlier on from that, but he released The Pearl in 1947, and then he released The Wayward Bus also in 1947. Now, 1948 for him was a pretty awful year, I guess, to say the least. So in 1948, his second wife, Gwen, divorced him. He'd already been through a divorce with his initial wife, Carol, and his second wife, Gwen, who he had 2 kids with, divorced him in 1948. And then even more significantly, his best friend, Ed Ricketts, passed away in an accident that same year. And so he lost both his wife and his best friend in 1948. He would eventually remarry in 1950 to a woman named Elaine, who from interviews that I've seen seems like a great lady, and she did seem very helpful for John Steinbeck and the rest of his life. And that was his last wife. He married her. He was married to her till he died, and she seemed to have a very positive influence on him and a healthy influence on him. And so he did go on to write, in 1952, he published East of Eden. And regarding East of Eden, he would say that it is what I have been practicing to write all of my life. And then later in 1961, he would actually release his last work of fiction until his death, which was The Winter of Our Discontent. He would release a few more books after this, but this was his last fiction book. And it really seems like critics really didn't like John Steinbeck while he was alive. John Steinbeck even won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1962, which is a pretty big deal, right? But a lot of critics said that he didn't deserve it. The continuous negative feedback he would get from critics and his really shaky relationship with them seemed to take a toll on him. And it almost seemed like the reason that he quit writing fiction after The Winter of Our Discontent was published in 1961 was just because the critics had almost crushed his spirit to do so, and he just kind of didn't want to anymore. But again, he would release some nonfiction. Most notably is Travels with Charlie, or Travels with Charlie in Search of America. So he basically took a camper with his dog Charlie and rode around America and met all kinds of different people, and then he would detail his experience and these kinds of people that he would meet in Travels with Charlie. He would actually work on, you know, at the beginning I mentioned his first love with literature was with King Arthur. And so during the end of his life, he was working on his own modern retelling of King Arthur. And I think it was called The Acts of King Arthur and His Knights. And you can read it today. It was not finished before he died, but I think there's like almost 400 pages that is available that he did write. So it's still quite a lot that you can read. But so obviously his love for King Arthur and King Arthur's Round Table and knights and everything just continued throughout the entirety of his life. And he also did a lot of film writing, like script writing. He wrote a ton of scripts. A lot of his books were adapted into movies, and for a lot of those movies he wrote the scripts. So he didn't just write fiction, he also wrote nonfiction, and he wrote a lot of scripts for films, and he really just did a lot during his life. But I think another important thing to really understand John Steinbeck's books is to really understand the Salinas Valley, because majority of his books, not all of them, but almost every single one of his books takes place in the Salinas Valley, which is where he grew up and where he would constantly return back to during his lifetime. So in terms of the geography of the Salinas Valley, it's in California, and you basically have this valley that to one side, so to the east of it, is the Gavilan Mountain Range, and then to the west, the side that faces the Pacific Ocean, is the Santa Lucia Mountain Range. And then winding up through the middle of the valley is the Salinas River, which feeds into the Monterey Bay. I'll also leave a link in the description to a map that was drawn. I don't remember who drew it. I'll put it on the screen. It was in like the late 1900s or something. I have it back here actually because I really love it, but it is a drawing of the Salinas Valley, and then it has on it all the different locations that a lot of his books take place in. So if you want to have a better idea of where his books are taking place in, you could look that up. Again, I'll put it in the description, and I'll put who drew it and everything. But John Steinbeck had a very clear love for the Salinas Valley, and he had a love for the nature of Salinas Valley and for the people. You can find his love for nature throughout so many of his books, and the way that he writes about the people of Salinas Valley is just so amazing. I don't know, there's just something about the way that John Steinbeck portrays people and their experiences and their thoughts and feelings and everything that you can just tell that he's really gifted in being able to understand other people's minds and their lives. And he does it in such an amazing way. All right, so now I'm going to get into the 5 books that I'll talk about in this video, and I'll just give you an introduction to them. So if you want to read some Steinbeck, maybe you could find any out of these 5 that you're interested in, or if you've already read some, but you want to read more, maybe one of these 5 you haven't read yet, and so you can learn a little bit of what it's about. And again, I'm hoping to make another video in the future where I'll introduce to you 5 more books by him. I haven't decided if I'm gonna do 10 more in one video, because there's like 10 more books by him that I could introduce to you, but I don't know if I'll do like 5 in one video and 5 in another video, so there'll be like 3 John Steinbeck videos, or if I'll do this one is like the biography and 5, and then the next one is like 5, and then the next one's 5. I don't know, it doesn't matter. Let's get into the books, okay? The first book that I'm going to talk about is my favorite John Steinbeck book, one of my favorite books of all time, actually, and that is East of Eden by John Steinbeck. Dear Pat, you came upon me carving some kind of little figure out of wood, and you said, "Why don't you make something for me?" I asked you what you wanted, and you said, "A box." What for? To put things in. What things? Whatever you have, you said. Well, here's your box. Nearly everything I have is in it, and it is not full. Pain and excitement are in it, and feeling good or bad, and evil thoughts and good thoughts, the pleasure of design and some despair, and the indescribable joy of creation. And on top of these are all the gratitude and love I have for you. And still the box is not full. John. Now, this book is a multi-generational novel, so it follows these 2 families throughout multiple generations, and those 2 families are the Trask family and the Hamilton family. Now, the Trask family starts with Cyrus and Alice Trask, and they currently live in Connecticut on a farm, and they have 2 children, Charles and Adam. And Adam, how he gets to the Salinas Valley, which of course this is where, the Salinas Valley is where this takes place, of course. He gets there because he eventually moves or migrates from Connecticut over to the Salinas Valley and starts a farm there. He buys some land there. And then the other family, the Hamiltons, how they get to Salinas Valley is they are Irish immigrants, and the oldest of the generation in here is Samuel and Liza Hamilton, and they're both Irish immigrants, and they go and buy land out here in Salinas Valley, and they start a farm, a ranch, and they end up having 9 children. And so that's how the Trask family and the Hamilton family end up becoming neighbors. And so that's how their lives kind of intertwine with each other at an eventual point in this book. But this book is commonly referred to as a Cain and Abel retelling, which is true, but I think the themes of Cain and Abel are obviously what's more dominant in this, and specifically the struggle between good and evil is a theme that is just rampant throughout the whole entire novel, honestly. Even though this book can be really heartbreaking at times, it definitely tore my heart out in multiple instances, but one thing I love about it is that there's still a feeling of hope throughout the whole thing. And that's because with this book, John Steinbeck, kind of the main message is that we all have a choice, that we all have power over our own mind and our fate, that in this struggle between good and evil, we can choose which side we go on, that evil is not some kind of inescapable force that is put on us and we can't get out of it. He tells us that we can, and we can have power over our own actions. Thou mayest is a really important phrase in this book, or the Hebrew word timshel is a really vital word in this book, and the discussion on it is great in this book, and I think that you'll love it if you read it. And I think with every single character in this book, you can see where they fall when it comes to that struggle between good and evil, like where they stand on it. Because I think it is a common thing for some people to go through a point in their life at least, or some people just, I guess, have it their whole life, I don't know, but that feeling where you feel like there's just this innate evilness inside of you, and that nothing you do will ever be good enough, and everything you do is just horrible and sucks and isn't good and is bad. And John Steinbeck is basically saying with this novel that that's not true, and that your fate is in your own hands. And it's just so good. This novel is amazing. It's really, really great. I will say, I think the first chapter of this book has a very different feel from the rest of it. So I don't know, just a warning, if you pick this book up, which you should pick this book up, but if you do, the first chapter is basically John Steinbeck setting the scene for the Salinas Valley and giving you just a really deep feel of the nature that exists there and the land. So it has a very different feel. I'd say really the story itself starts in chapter 2, but you should still read the first chapter, of course. I don't mean skip the first chapter. I'm just saying, if you pick this up, the first chapter does have a different feel from the rest of the novel. My favorite characters in this book are Charles, Tom, and Cal, in that order. That's the order that they appear in. I love them so much. They're my favorite characters in this book. And of course, based on your own experiences and things, your favorite characters could be different, but Charles, Tom, and Cal are my absolute favorite characters. I love them. They tore my heart. They really did. They really did. Don't be, I don't know. It's not that big, I don't think. What is it, like 600 pages? Yeah. 600 pages, like exactly. So it's not huge. It's not like ginormous or anything, but if you're not, I guess, used to reading bigger books and you feel intimidated by the size of this, don't feel intimidated. I swear to you, even though it's a classic, and I know some people feel that classics read old and, you know, it doesn't read easily, don't feel that way. John Steinbeck writes in a way that is just, it flows so well and it's so easy to read. So even though you might be intimidated by the size of this, I promise to you that it is very readable and that you'll fly through it. So don't worry about it. Be excited, because that means that you get to spend 600 pages with amazing characters and an amazing story. So I love this book so much. I highly recommend it. You should read it. The next book that I'm going to introduce to you is Tortilla Flat. For Danny's house was not unlike the Round Table, and Danny's friends were not unlike the Knights of it. And this is the story of how that group came into being, of how it flourished and grew to be an organization beautiful and wise. This story deals with the adventuring of Danny's friends, with the good they did, with their thoughts and their endeavors. In the end, this story tells how the talesman was lost and how the group disintegrated. This is such a pick-me-up book for me. It's one of my favorite John Steinbeck books as well. If East of Eden's my favorite, I might even say this is my second favorite John Steinbeck book because I love this book so much. This is such a fun, lighthearted novel. It is just full of just hilarious moments and it's amazing. So this book follows a group of men who live in Tortilla Flat, which is a district that lies above Monterey, California. And they consist of Danny, Pablo, Pion, Big Joe, Pirate, and Jesus Maria. It starts at the end of World War I. So Danny has just come back from serving in World War I. He's come back to Tortilla Flat and he finds that his grandfather has passed away and he has inherited 2 houses from his grandfather, which he's not too happy about anyway. It's too much responsibility, you know? And he meets back up with one of his old friends, Pylon, and the book just kind of rolls on from there. I guess to put it simply, this book is just about these 6 guys having fun, being friends, and doing everything they can to get more wine. This isn't serious at all. And I think one of the reasons why it did so well when it was published in 1935 is because obviously the Great Depression's happening. And so everyone is having a very difficult time with their daily lives. And reading this book just provided people with a literary escape, especially because the characters in this book are very poor. And so a lot of people in the Great Depression can relate to that. But what these characters do is they're very poor, but they like that. They don't have a problem with it and they enjoy life and they prefer not having all of these really demanding jobs and all this money and all this property. Like they love living a laid back life. And so in the Great Depression, you're having all these people who are homeless and struggling to eat and struggling to provide. And then you have a book like this where characters are in the same situation of poverty, but are having a grand old time with it and just having fun. And these characters are honestly so endearing. I mean, this is a huge pick-me-up book for me. There are scenes in this that if I just want a quick little good, I don't know, dose of serotonin, is that what people say? Something to just pick me up real quick. I'll just flip to one of the scenes in this book that I loved and I'll just read it because all the characters in this are just so endearing and it's great. It's really, really, really great. I highly recommend this book. Again, don't expect like a big plot or anything like that. It's just a fun book. And if you just want to have a good time, it's not too long. So if you just want to have a good time, read Tortilla Flat. All right, so the next book kind of has a similar slice of life feel, and that is Cannery Row by John Steinbeck. Cannery Row in Monterey in California is a poem, a stink, a grating noise, a quality of light, a tone, a habit, a nostalgia, a dream. Its inhabitants are, as the man once said, whores, pimps, gamblers, and sons of blank, by which he meant everybody. Had the man looked through another peephole, he might have said saints and angels and martyrs and holy men, and he would have meant the same thing. I don't have a physical copy, so I just printed off a picture. Sorry, I hope that's fine. This book is about a street called Cannery Row that's in Monterey, California. I don't think it was initially called Cannery Row, if I'm not mistaken, but after the success of this book, the street is changed to Cannery Row, so you can visit Cannery Row, like the actual Cannery Row, and I think there's even a monument. I've never been, but I think there's a monument there that has John Steinbeck on the top of it on Cannery Row. But you can visit the road that he is talking about in this book and that this book takes place in. It's literally just about a street called Cannery Row and all the different people that live on this street. I guess at the very core of this novel, you have a group of friends and their leader is Mac. So kind of similar, honestly, to Tortilla Flat, that group of friends is. But that's the only similarity that this has to Tortilla Flat. Their dynamic and their situation's kind of similar to Danny and his friends in Tortilla Flat, but they're kind of, I think these guys are funnier though, but whatever. So you have them and they are wanting to throw a party for a marine biologist named Doc. He's a marine biologist who lives on the street and he runs a marine biology lab called Marine Biological, and they want to throw a party for him and get everyone involved. So I guess that's the simplest storyline I can give you, but I don't think going into it focusing on the storyline is really what you should do, because I don't think that's the point. I think this book is really just giving you a glimpse into the lives of the people that live on this street and all the different kinds of people that live there. I think that's really more so what the book is. And so you have a lot of other characters, like I already mentioned. You have Doc, who is modeled after his best friend, John Steinbeck's best friend, which I mentioned earlier in his biography, named Edward Ricketts. So the Doc in this book is very obviously Ed Ricketts. I mean, Ed Ricketts in real life owned a biology lab on this street in Monterey, California. And so in this book, you have Doc, who runs a business called Marine Biological on the street. But you also have other characters like Lee Chong, who runs a grocery store on the street. And you have Dora, who runs a brothel that's called the Bear Flag Restaurant on this street. And you just get to see a look into all of the different characters and all of the different kinds of people that live in this one street. One thing I really love about John Steinbeck is the way that he portrays people that are typically considered the bums of society. So in this book, like, you have Mac and his friends who are very, like, they live in poverty, and the same in Tortilla Flat. You have Danny and his friends who live in poverty, and John Steinbeck also includes a lot of like prostitutes in his books and things, and like Dora, who runs a brothel, right? But John Steinbeck portrays them in such endearing ways, and in ways that, rather than how they're commonly considered, oh, they're considered lazy and the bums of society, John Steinbeck portrays them in a positive way that makes it seem like they've actually found the key to happiness and the key to a stress-free life that it seems like everyone else is trying to look for. Like, everyone who calls these kinds of people lazy and the bottom barrels of society, they're the ones looking for something that these people have actually found. I can read you a quote from this book in reference to Mac and his friends. It says, "Mac and the boys avoid the trap, walk around the poison, step over the noose, while a generation of trapped, poisoned, and trussed-up men scream at them and call them no-goods, come to bad ends, blots on the town, thieves, rascals, bums." The next book I'm going to introduce to you is Red Pony. A red pony colt was looking at him out of the stall. Its tense ears were forward and a light of disobedience was in its eyes. Its coat was rough and thick as an Airedale's fur, and its mane was long and tangled. Jody's throat collapsed in on itself and cut his breath short. This is an episodic novella, so it's quite short, and there's only like 4 chapters in it, so it doesn't take long to read it all. But it's about a boy named Jody who lives on a ranch near Salinas, California, and he one day gets a foal from his father. So his father gives him a foal, and he ends up naming this foal Gablin, after the Gablin mountain range, which lives right next to him, obviously. And the book is basically just about him raising this foal, training this foal, and then what he has to go through when eventually his beloved horse falls ill. It is basically a look into the passage that someone takes as they're going from their childhood into maturity. And so in this book specifically, you have his horse, Gablin, falling ill, which acts as the catalyst for Jody kind of having to shed that childhood innocence that we all have to shed at some point, and coming to the realization that death exists and that it is prevalent and it's something that you have to face and it affects you. Now, I'm not exactly sure how much the average person would enjoy this novella. For me, I really loved this novella. It has a special place in my heart because I also got a foal when I wasn't 10, I think I was 11 or 12 years old when I was given a baby horse and I had to raise it, and it was horrible, to be quite honest with you. She was extremely feisty, and I mean, I don't know why anyone gave me a feisty foal as a 11-year-old. I don't know, but I did. I had a young horse that I had to spend every single day working with. That's why this book for me kind of had a special place in my heart, just because I went through such a similar experience. Now, my horse didn't fall ill or anything. I didn't go through that, but just going through that experience of getting a horse as a young kid and having to train it, and it being resistant to your training because it's not an already trained horse, it's a baby horse. And so having to go through all of that, I just related to a lot of what Jody was going through. And so for me, I really liked this because it felt like I was just reading something that I had gone through. Like, I feel a bond with this book, you know, or this novella, but I'm not sure how the average person, how enjoyable this would be. I think this was originally written as a children's novel by John Steinbeck. If any of it does sound interesting to you, then you might want to read this. If you grew up with horses, if you're interested in horses, maybe you'd like it. I'm not saying that you won't like it. I'm just saying that I don't know how enjoyable it would be per se, because for me, I'm like, oh, well, I love it so much because of, you know, my past experience with horses. So then if I didn't have that, how much would I love it? I don't know. But yeah, if you want to read more John Steinbeck, you could always pick this one up. Again, it's short, it doesn't take that long, but it is just a nice book by John Steinbeck that you can pick up. So the very last book that I will introduce to you today, I also don't have physically, so I'm just gonna have to show you a picture of it, but that is To a God Unknown by John Steinbeck, obviously. Joseph raised his head and looked at its old, wrinkled limbs. His eyes lighted with recognition and welcome for his father's strong and simple being, which had dwelt in his youth like a cloud of peace, had entered the tree. I do really like this cover as well. I really like it. So this book is about a man named Joseph Wayne, and he lives in Vermont, but he wants to move out to California because of the prospect of cheap, fertile land that exists over there. And so he gets his father's blessing, and so he moves out to California, and he eventually settles in, I think it's the Valley of Nuestra Senora, which is near Salinas Valley. And he immediately, once he gets there, he immediately feels a, let's just say, a very intimate connection with the land, I guess. And specifically on the land that he purchases, there is a large ancient oak tree, kind of like this one. That's why I like the cover. It's kind of like this. There's a large ancient oak tree that sits in the middle of his land. And one day he gets a letter that is telling him that his father back in Vermont has passed away. And as he's reading this letter, he starts to feel like upon his father's death, his father's soul has now entered into this ancient oak tree. And so he starts to believe that his father's soul is living and inhabiting this tree that sits in the middle of his land, and that it kind of is now the life source of his land. He starts to kind of exhibit some pagan habits, if you will, because he starts to sacrificing things to this tree, believing that this tree is the reason his land is having such good results and has so much fertility. And so he starts becoming obsessed with this tree and very emotionally connected to this tree, which he believes is his father looking out over the land. And he starts to kind of develop more so pagan beliefs regarding the land and this tree. And so upon his father's death, his 3 other brothers move out to where he is. Burton, Thomas, and Benjamin. Now, most notably out of these brothers, Thomas is my favorite, but in terms of the importance of the story, Burton is a very, very devout Protestant. And he's someone that basically has no tolerance mentally for other religions. He kind of just thinks that anything that's not, you know, his exact belief system is just evil. When he starts noticing that Joseph is kind of exhibiting some pagan beliefs, he's kind of freaking out. And so one day he kills this ancient tree. He does something to it. I think he like cuts some bark in a 360 way or something like that. And it basically, the tree starts dying because of this. And once this happens, a big drought happens on the land. The ending of this book, by the way, is amazing. I love the ending of this book. And I don't even feel like I fully understand the ending. You know, part of me is like, I have an idea, but I'm like, do I fully get the ending? I don't even know. But that's what makes it so much better, you know, because you have all these questions still. Like, what in the world just happened? What I got from this book was that in people's spirits and in their lives, there's a need for religion to help people get through life and get through hardships and things. But what this looks like for everyone is different. And that the spirituality that people are going to exhibit can't be the same for everyone, because what works for someone is not what works for everyone, because we're all so different. And even though everyone has like different religions and things, and you know, if someone has a different spiritual belief than you, does that necessarily make it evil? I mean, I don't think so. And I think this book kind of shows that. It just shows all the different ways that people go about understanding who their creator is and who the creator of the universe is, and all the ways that they go about having their different beliefs and the way that they go to show their love and admiration for what they believe the creator is. I think in this book, which is quite different from most of John Steinbeck's books, is I found the spirituality aspect of it more interesting than the characters themselves, which is pretty different from most of John Steinbeck's books. For me, most of John Steinbeck's books, it's the characters that are incredible and John Steinbeck's understanding of people. But for me in this book, it was less of the characters that I felt fascinated with and more of the story and all the different like spiritualities that are going on and all the different religions that are happening in this book and all of that. I just found that part more interesting than I did the characters, which is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that as a negative, by the way. I'm just saying that it has a different feel. And this again is, if you remember from the biography in the beginning, this is one of his first books. This was I think, 3rd book that he ever published in 1933. So it was one that didn't do well when he published it initially. And I think it is a more underrated work by him even today. I think it is really good. And I don't know why more people haven't read it. I don't know, maybe it's just because he has so many books that even if some of his books are great, it's just like there's too many, so sometimes some of them just get kind of pushed under the radar. So maybe that's what's happened with this one, I don't know. But I do really like this one and I recommend it. Although honestly, I recommend every John Steinbeck novel. Honestly, just read all of his books. But yes, that is it for the 5 books that I'm going to introduce to you for this video. I hope that you liked it and maybe you found another work by him that you haven't read that you're interested in reading, or maybe you read all of these 5. And again, I hope that maybe in the future I will make another video where I introduce even more of his books to you. I hope that you liked learning a little bit more about John Steinbeck and finding some more works by him that maybe you're interested in reading. So thank you so much for watching.